So as we talk about VMaaS, Vulnerability Management as a Service. So for those of you that have worked with Ontech for a couple of years, you know, we've been running vulnerability scans and assessments for, oh man, it's probably close to coming up on 10 years, at least 7. One of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years is we wanted to adjust this offering. We wanted to get a little bit more specific. We also wanted to get a little bit more automated with it. So we're going to talk about that today, talk about what we're doing and kind of where the future holds with it. Like everything, we've got a little bit of setup content that we want to run through today. We want to showcase and share the meter approach to kind of understand what is that bad actor doing? What's the path that they take? Attack surface, those that are Ontech customers have heard this statement from us a lot, but it's important to understand that attack surface, and VMaaS is a very good way to help you understand that. The cyber defense matrix, this has been that push. So those that have been on some webinars with us already in 2024 have started to see that matrix, but really our goal is to kind of simplify that discussion of tools, technology, and how that lines up. We're going to talk a little bit about the exchange rate, security versus convenience exchange rate, and then kind of the business case. From there, we'll turn it over to Jared and let him kind of run through a lab environment that we built out in the VMaaS platform. And then, like I said, we'll have a couple minutes here at the end for some Q&A. So some terminology. I'm going to do my best here today as we set stuff up to avoid the 3-letter acronyms, but unfortunately there is going to be a couple that we can't avoid that we want to make sure that you know. So NVT, network vulnerability test, it's basically us looking at a system and inspecting it to see what result came back. A port, that's something that controls what's allowed in and out on a particular system. It could be a computer, it could be an actual firewall appliance. CVE, common vulnerabilities and exposures. So this is not something that Ontech has created. This obviously is something that we're leveraging the federal government for in terms of CIS and NIST and those. We're using their scoring methodology. The scoring system, same thing, is followed, all based on their scoring strategy. Now our platform does a little bit more in terms of like risk-based approach. So it's looking at both the score of a vulnerability plus the likelihood of an event, and then also the impact. So we're taking a little bit farther in the platform than just this traditional CVSS score. But it's important to understand that, again, that's not something that Ontech is making. Vulnerability scan, that's really what we're talking about today. And then that step above it is that penetration test, that active exploit against a discovered vulnerability. So the meter approach, those that are familiar with meter have probably heard this before, but those that aren't, if this is your first time kind of seeing it, we think this is really important to kind of share because it helps you as a consumer, a customer, understand what does a bad actor go through. And there's obviously a substantial more info here. We're not going to go through all of these today by any means. But if you look at it, bad actors follow a very similar methodology, especially as it pertains to ransomware types attacks and more of these sophisticated attacks that you see out in the wild. They start with reconnaissance, and then they work through to persistence and escalation of privileges, to lateral movement, attempting to infect or compromise multiple devices, assets, user accounts, and then exfiltration or impact. So meter.org or attack.meter.org, excuse me. The slide deck will be provided with the recording that we send out. If you ever wanted to go and look at this in substantial more detail, by all means, but we could spend a whole webinar talking through steps and tactics that bad actors use. So a lot of people ask, why VMaaS? And Dwight Eisenhower, a famous U.S. general, for those that don't know, helped plan a lot of the battles and stuff as it pertained to World War II. But in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that's really a core concept that the VMaaS type offering is going to provide. It's not necessarily going to look at anything and everything that could happen, but it's at least going to go out and identify where there's risk. With understanding where that risk, you can make plans. And with those plans, you can hopefully react faster, recover faster, or potentially just avoid an incident altogether if possible. But it's important to understand that there's more to an attack surface than just inside your 4 walls. So you've obviously got your company, and you've got items and assets and data that's within it. You've also got your employees' private networks. Again, COVID really accelerated work from home. It still exists in a lot of businesses. So we've also got to look at that peripheral of their network. You also have public spaces while employees travel. Me as an example on the sales end, I'm out at places. I'm not always necessarily inside the Ontech building, inside Ontech security parameters or that initial fence. So understanding that attack surface can vary and differ based on a location is important. The last 2 or 3 years, we've also seen the supply chain. So customers and vendors above and downstream to you and your business potentially can impact you. A good example there with Ontech is we obviously use a lot of cloud systems. An outage with those is an impact to the business. Now, we're not going to necessarily go out and vulnerability scan our supplier, but at the end of the day, we want to understand that risks that exist there. And really what we want to start to look at is, do we have the right coverage in the right areas? And that's one of the core pieces that the cyber defense matrix does, is it's looking at where do I have white space? It's a really core concept of this tool set, is to do a white space analysis. So I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on the defense matrix today. To quick highlight it, that top section is NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and that's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Identify, we want to inventory assets, we want to assess those assets. Protect, we want to protect those, whether that's patching, containing, isolating, hardening those systems. Detect, when something happens, we want to detect those anomalies. We potentially want to hunt for intrusions. Respond, we're acting on events. Recover, we're bringing things back to a normal operation. Those dimensions, that second is those 5 classes, devices, apps, applications, networks, data, users. As we talk with customers, we can simplify every business down to these 5 classes. Even though one entity might be a nonprofit, another might be a manufacturer, and another might be like a professional services organization like a law firm. But at the end of the day, those networks are the same across those 3 entities. There is nuances between them, but they are uniform in terms of these. So devices, we're looking at workstations, servers, phones, those types of those stations, what users are using. Applications is the software, the interactions and flows on those devices. Networks is all the connections and traffic that's flowing among that. Data is that content at rest and transit and used by it. And then users are those people that consume all of that. A really important piece as we talk about the cyber defense matrix is the degrees of dependency. And this makes a little bit more sense if we go to the next slide. And when we look at it, as we progress through an incident, we want to rely on people more than technology. But to identify, we want to rely on technology, because at the end of the day, it's really difficult. If I look at Jared, who's also responsible for Ontech's IT network, for him to know every computer, every piece of software that's installed on those computers, for him to try to do that manually is too time consuming. We need automation. We need technology to deliver that. And that's a core area where vulnerability scans and vulnerability management fits. Is it's going to go out and it's going to automate it, identify assets, identify new assets that connected to the IT network, and then also assess what software is on those and what's vulnerable within them. So that red line is what is called boom. So Sunil Yu, the developer of this matrix, basically anything to the right is post an event happening. Anything to the left is preventative. So as we look at where vulnerability scans fit, they fit in that identification area. We're looking at both vulnerabilities in terms of application on the network, not necessarily the data itself. The data itself isn't necessarily risky, but the systems, the access, the applications that use it could have vulnerabilities. But this is that use case as you look at like a white space analysis that we thought it was really important to kind of share of where vulnerability scanning and VMaaS fits. Is it's really in that identify and it's in that protect segment more than it is on the reactivity side. Security versus convenience exchange rate. Those that have heard me speak a lot, hear me talk about this a lot. At the end of the day, it all comes down to user experience. So we want to try to find that balance. We inherently make things more secure. We make them less convenient for the user. We make them more convenient for the user to access. We inherently make those less secure. And there's a battle in this. There's a push and pull. 0 is an unrealistic number in terms of like vulnerability management. It's very rare an organization have absolutely no risk within their organization whatsoever. So it really comes down to where is that investment, where is that return on investment best used, best suited. Teaching the why. This was important to us as we talked about kind of setting up vulnerability management. All of these examples here had vulnerability management really been implemented in a proactive approach, could have helped solve or prevent some of these. All of these examples are users just trying to do their job. No user in any of these circumstances or examples that we've got here were them attempting to be malicious or do something. They were all in pursuit of just doing their job. So like I said, that first one, an accounting user's email was compromised. The bad actor waited for an opportune time and they struck with fraud. Ransomware, a user opened an attachment that delivered a payload. Those first two examples, the vulnerability management isn't necessarily going to prevent that or stop those two, but having that as part of a risk management curriculum is going to help you understand users phishing, their habits with it. So that's where VMaaS starts to play in with other tool sets, other deliverables that you might have implemented with your organization to become that more encompassing risk management type practice. The last three are all something that VMaaS could help with. So example number 3, bank loan processor, they downloaded a client shared them a really old Excel file. They downloaded a converter program that they thought was legitimate, and that turned out to be a malicious program. A VulnScan product would have potentially identified that software if it would have flagged it as malicious or even scanned it and see that it had malicious content within it. It would have flagged that there's an issue. Orphan software. So an HR manager downloaded a toolbar long ago, and it just sat on that system. That user stopped using the toolbar, but that software was still installed on that system and it became susceptible. A bad actor injected code into that, which then allowed them to compromise that user's system. The last one is the elephant in the room between IT providers and customers is the amount of assets that sit on the IT network is skyrocketing. So in this circumstance, it was a private school. They implemented smart thermostats. The bad actor entered through unsecure functions of those smart thermostats. So there is going to be times where, again, the business case is there. We need to have this because of this. But what vulnerability management is going to do is going to allow us to look at what's potentially susceptible there and then take mitigating action. Not to say that in this case that private school could have got rid of the smart thermostats. There was a legitimate purpose for it. But had we known or had they known that there was susceptibility with those, we could have segmented on the network. We could have kind of put up a wall so it couldn't see other portions of it. So it's really important as we design that strategy. That's what VMaaS is doing, is it's providing that data to make those decisions. So the business case, and then I'm going to turn everything over to Jared for the next 15, 20 minutes to run through the platform. 0 is an unrealistic number. Those of you that have been doing vulnerability scans in the past on like a project basis know this. Getting to 0 is hard unless you have an infinite budget. It's a good practice to know what's out there though. Even if you can't get to 0, if we go back to that quote, of planning for battle, think of it as cyber attack as a battle. It's easier to be prepared than to not know. It gives us insights into all those assets and then allows us to create action plans. Can we remediate this? Can we make this not exist anymore? Or can we take those mitigating steps to make sure that impact wouldn't happen in the event something did occur? Regulated industries are being forced to this. I'll be honest, those that are in like the insurance space as an example, it's no longer a choice. You've got to start to develop some form of a risk management process. Insurance is getting close to being required too, depending on your coverage type. The statement that we see a lot, consistency allows for visibility. So by consistently scanning, so instead of doing a vulnerability scan as a project one time, I did it today, vulnerability management is going to do that consistently, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, whatever interval makes sense. That visibility, though, allows for better control.
Yeah, so as Keegan mentioned, kind of knowing what your environment looks like, knowing where your assets are, knowing what you have out there is a systematic approach that you need to be taking in order to understand what your risks are and what your vulnerabilities might be. So in this sample environment or this demo environment, we have a couple assets listed out here. Let me just kind of briefly talk about what these agents are or what these assets are. So a probe agent would be something that sits on your server, for example, or different segments of your network that has access to various subcomponents of your network. Lightweight agents would be things like desktops, laptops, those types of devices. So in this environment, we only have a couple desktops available for agents and scanning, but I think you'll understand after going through it a little bit what the potential is for a tool such as a VMaaS tool or a vulnerability management as a service tool. Um, kind of going down the left-hand side, you've got your probes and agents that starts at the top that gives you your visibility to your assets and your environment. As you go through it, there's more reporting capabilities. So this overview tab really gives you kind of a breakdown of where your application vulnerabilities are trending, historic timeline in terms of what types of vulnerabilities you have across your assets, whether they're critical, high, medium, or low vulnerabilities. You've also got some network vulnerability trending over here, which we don't have available in the reporting system that we're showing you right now. But if you had all your assets in here, you would see all of that data. Then you've got your breakdown of your top 10 assets by active vulnerabilities. So again, we set up this demo environment and this lab environment to show that of an environment that's not being updated, not being patched, not being remediated for vulnerabilities. So it's common to see 43 critical, 237 high, and 246 medium, 14 low. So obviously they break this down by criticality. So critical vulnerabilities are things that are received a score by the scoring system that Keegan referenced slightly earlier, meaning these are highly exploitable vulnerabilities that need attention and need to be patched as soon as possible. So let me kind of keep going down the left-hand side. Here we've got our active assets. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight in here. We've got a lot of data in here. You've got MAC address, you've got the date the device was last discovered, when the last scan happened for vulnerabilities on that device, what the importance of that asset is. So let me just walk through an example. If this was a file server or a domain controller or a SQL server, something that was really important to my environment and to my network, I would want to classify that as a high importance device. You're also going to get some tagging, so you can tag, whether it's maybe it's a different department within your network that you want to kind of classify. Okay, I've got my accounting computers here, I've got my HR computers here, I've got my service computers here. You can tag various devices, and it's going to also give you a lot of breakdown in terms of what that equipment has running on it, what operating system it's running, what some of the hardware is within it, what security build number it's on, how long the device has been up, how long it's been installed for, a lot of good information, including serial number. Whether the hard drive is encrypted, I think that's also an important piece to understanding what risk might be and where vulnerabilities might exist. Is if hard drives are encrypted, the data as well that resides on them is encrypted. So, and then we really get into the meat of the application here, and this is where we get into the vulnerabilities. Breaks down by criticality over here, and you can drill down into each of those vulnerabilities and learn a little bit more about what those vulnerabilities are. Breaks it down by application as well. So if someone is running unsupported or insecure version of Zoom meeting or Microsoft Office, or think of any application that you might be running that has vulnerabilities in it, it breaks it down within this section. Also talks about what ports might be open on the endpoint. This is probably more critical in servers than it is in desktops and laptops, but needless to say, it breaks the port security down as well. And then over here, you get into a lot of different compliance opportunities. So if you are basing your framework for compliance on CIS or on Cyber Essential or HIPAA or ISO, NIST, all the different compliance tools that are out there and all the compliance frameworks that exist, you can determine whether or not you are not compliant or compliant with those frameworks. And then down here, I wanted to highlight a couple things. You're going to get a grading score for each of these endpoints or assets. And obviously 5 is good, 1 is bad. So the one bad down here is showing that there isn't any backup software on this particular device. if there were backup software and something were to happen maliciously, obviously we'd be able to recover that system a lot quicker. And then as you kind of go up, it talks about whether or not your operating system is supported, how old the system might be, any network vulnerabilities that might exist on the device. And here I did some failed logins just so you could see on a device that has failed logins. Sometimes that's just somebody not putting in the right password, but it also could mean that a threat actor is trying to get into the system and maybe break into the network and has failed to do so. So it's really good from a reporting and compliance standpoint. And I won't go through all of these submenus, but there's a lot. There's a compliance report card, some remediation options, what your vulnerabilities are, some informational findings, and some other things in here as well. So let me drill into some of these critical vulnerabilities so you can see where this tool really, I think, pays for itself. So what we're talking about here is that we look by priority. So what are the critical vulnerabilities on this particular asset? There's two things being called out here. One is a product called Microsoft Visual Studio. It's critical severity, and the reason why is because it's an end of life application or end of life software. And usually what that means is the people that fix these problems and patch these holes that exist within the system is no longer being developed on, or it's end of life, as they say. And that can pose a significant risk to your organization if you're running end of life hardware, end of life software. There aren't any patches coming out for this anymore, so you should just get rid of the software altogether. And that's just one example. Some of the high vulnerabilities that exist on this particular endpoint, I'll get into that. So it's looking at what your core operating system is. So what version of Windows 10 are you running? And what vulnerabilities exist within that version of Windows that you're running? So if you have a automated patching system, maybe this could identify a problem within the system where it's not patching properly, or this device is offline during the patching timeframes. Kind of breaks down by base score what the impact could be if the vulnerability was exploited and how likely it is that it is being exploited. And what's really cool about this is each of these, what they call CVEs, critical vulnerabilities, are linked to specific articles. So if you're like, I don't know what CVE 2024-21338 is, believe me, I'm not 100% familiar with that myself. However, this links to a national database that's provided by various vendors. This one is NIST that Keegan referred to earlier. And it kind of breaks that down of what the base score is, why it's important, and it links you to Microsoft specific articles on what you need to do to resolve this vulnerability. So I always click through into the hyperlink to the actual vendor to show a little bit more about this. And even for the non-technical folks, I think this is something that at least you could bring to your IT staff and say, hey, we have these vulnerabilities. What are our options for remediating these vulnerabilities? And sometimes the option is to just remove the software. Other times it is to accept the vulnerability, and preferably it would be to patch that vulnerability or resolve that vulnerability so that on the next scan, it detects that, hey, these 30 vulnerabilities that were out there last month have now been remediated in the last 30 days. And that's really good to provide to insurance for cyber liability purposes, for business insurance purposes. If you're being audited by anybody, it's really, you're able to show that historical data and show that you are doing something to resolve those patches, to resolve those vulnerabilities rather. So in here, it breaks down by operating system what the impact is, and these are elevation of privileges. So this is a pretty important update to be running, and there's links directly to each one of the versions of Windows, because we all have various versions running within our network that we need to be maintaining, whether that's servers, desktops, laptops, etc. And same goes for the medium. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but same type of scenario. It's going to break down what those medium vulnerabilities are and what the links are to being able to resolve those. And the good thing about this tool is you can set up a lot of automated vulnerability management or a lot of automated vulnerability patching to where, say, a new critical vulnerability gets discovered today and your asset scans your asset scan that's scheduled runs and says, okay, you have 20 endpoints that are vulnerable to this. You can set up automated patching so that it just takes care of those immediately. Not everything is automated. Obviously, there's more and more functionality and more features being broken down into this tool that allows you to continue to do that going forward. Excuse me, but the main point is a lot of the vulnerabilities that exist don't require any human interaction to resolve them. So, and then specifically down to the applications, this is redundant with what we reviewed earlier, but this is going to break it down by application, tell you what version it is. If you don't know how to uninstall it, it gives you an uninstall string, which is really nice. Yeah, so in here, this kind of Keegan was referring to the remediation plan. So this gives you a more of a holistic view where you don't have to drill into individual assets. You can kind of see, okay, what application requires an update, what's the recommended version, and where how do I fix that, and then what assets have this vulnerability on them. So this Intel Rapid Storage technology links directly to the fix, describes the vulnerability in detail, and then gives you what versions you need to be able to fix that issue. So it kind of gives you a recommendation. They recommend updating this software, gives you the versions, and explains that. And then right here, it gives you the link to the download for resolving those vulnerabilities with the Intel Rapid Storage. Same thing for all these other ones. If this right here, this Firefox vulnerability, if it's got a blinking indicator right here, that means it can be auto patched. You just have to set your auto patching system up to be able to do that. And what's important there is if you look at all these vulnerabilities that exist, you've got 4 high, 1 critical, 1 critical, 1 critical. Here, Firefox alone has 43 critical vulnerabilities associated with it. 235 high vulnerabilities and 243 medium, 6 low. So the fact that you can remediate, 700 vulnerabilities on one endpoint with this type of system is really helpful and really important. You can also view evidence. So if you need to see, what that version is and why it's saying that it's vulnerable. I specifically downloaded an old version and a vulnerable version to be able to show why it's important to be able to update third-party applications. But as you can see, it links you straight to the release notes. You can download the newest version. And if you were to fix that issue, the next scan is going to say, hey, these vulnerabilities were remediated. And then in the reporting system, you can go back in time and show that, on February 27th at 11 a.m., we had 700 vulnerabilities. On February 28th at 11 a.m. when we ran our scan, we were down to, less than that. So like Keegan said, it's rare that you're going to be able to get to 0 vulnerabilities because things change. People download and install different applications to do their work all the time. But needless to say, it is a good tracking system and a good remediation monitoring tool. Keegan, any other remediation specifically that you wanted me to review in here?
No, like you said, I think being able to show the panel, and then also your other point for those that are required to start to develop and build more of like a risk management practice, that reporting kind of simplifies it for whomever in your organization is responsible to like catalog that, put that together. Because we can, again, the automation within the platform allows us to send out weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever interval you've got to track that and provide that data on it. The other area where the remediation plan comes in handy, for those of you that work with larger entities, the amount that we've seen requested of like a vendor due diligence and showing, hey, what have you done? What's susceptible on your network? Being able to just come in here and grab platform reports and provide it rather than trying to like manually compile stuff, again, simplifies that for both you and then that vendor that you're working with that's requiring that data of you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Keegan. I think here you can kind of see just without even running a report, you can see what's pending or what has not been patched, and then you can see what has been remediated right by flipping in the status page. So these are always associated with reporting. that comes out on a recurring basis as well. But if you needed to, say, provide an auditor access to the portal to be able to just kind of navigate through it and pull up their own information, that's an option as well. And I don't know if I showed it earlier, but you can pick um, this asset link here will tell you exactly which assets have been remediated, what day they've been remediated on, and what the remediated version was. So that's really helpful from a reporting standpoint. Keegan, was there anything in the standard reports that you wanted to review in here? I mean, there's a boatload of them, as you know. I think one of the go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say there's a lot of reporting, and that's one of those things. I know there's a couple customers on here that piloted this with us. They definitely saw the data that we can push out there, but at the same time, we don't want to like inundate users with too much data. So there's kind of that balance in terms of what do we provide, what are we trying to do, what are we trying to accomplish, and so much of that again comes down to that budget. We discover a lot of stuff, but what's the dollars we have to accomplish it? And that's where we want to start to really focus those efforts. So that remediation plan gives us that baseline to start, because we're now analyzing both the scoring from a vulnerability standpoint, but also the likelihood, which then allows us to start to really say like, hey, to Jared's point with Firefox, um, with automation, with a real simple checkbox, I can resolve a lot of these. So that's big bang for the buck. There's not a lot of dollar investment to then go ahead and get that done versus the C++, that other one that Jared pulled up. Software system could use it. That could be something that you can't go change because the software version that you're using needs that version of C++ to function. And that's where instead of remediating, we start to look at mitigating. So, hey, I can't actually get rid of this, but can I take steps to isolate that on the network? Can I disconnect that device from the internet because it really doesn't need internet connection? I just need to run this software in the shop or whatever that circumstance may be. So really identifying again where there's risk and then charting that path. How do we reduce that risk profile? How do we get rid of it? Ideally, if we can, but there's going to be times where we can't. Jared, one last thing, and I know we don't have it set up here in our little lab environment, but I did want to highlight that the platform has the capability to do it, is external scanning.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, a vast majority of time spent with vulnerability scanning is inside the network, but there is also an outbound into inbound. So here's like a sample report where we're essentially kind of simulating us as a bad actor. We're outside the four walls. We don't have any passwords. We don't have any usernames and things to log in with. We're simply going out and just pulsing, hey, what can I find? So like in this one, as an example, there's a couple things that we can glean up. Again, if I was a bad actor right away, the first is it's TDS Internet. You can tell that by that domain proxy. So I can see here in that case, the TDS.net. I know then that you have a TDS internet connection. Below that, I can start to see what vulnerabilities are out there. So there's a certificate issue, there's some SSL, TLS. So then I can start to formulate what can I attempt to do to manipulate that to attempt to circumvent and get access to that internal network. So whenever you're doing like a risk management approach, you're always starting from outside in, because at the end of the day, if it's really easy to get inside the four walls, that's step one. We got to fix that first, and then it starts to reduce that risk inside the network. But yeah, thanks, Jared, for popping that up.
Yep.
And then these follow the same as the internals that we've already shown. It'll show you what needs to be updated, what's the remediation for it. All of that would be contained within there of what to do.
Yeah, and I would
Cool.
also highlight some just quick things over here. The ability to see into your Active Directory. I know the reports came up there, but being able to see all your assets, what devices have checked in recently, which ones haven't. So from an auditing and a cleanup perspective, it's really good to be able to, look at how many computers do I have that haven't touched the network in 6 months. That's one of those compliance requirements, is cleaning up old devices, things like that. How many login failures have I had in the last 30 days? Do I have a password policy? And if so, what is my password policy? You may be asked by insurance or cyber liability to be able to provide something like that and have some implementation of that. So I think the reports are pretty endless. What permissioning do I have across the network? a lot of times people that are not in accounting have access to accounting data, and that's how ransomware can affect those data files as well. So really helpful there. And I think that pretty much summarizes what I wanted to show in the portal today.
Yeah, good. I appreciate that, Jared. Yeah, there's a lot more in the platform, similar to those that joined for our DNS conversations as we rolled those out. We wanted to get the vuln scanning portion kind of updated first, and get that tweaked and in line with what we needed. The goal for us here over the next, I don't know, 6 to 12 months is the third party patching. That's something that Jared's really touted that is impactful. It also is a time saver. So instead of us doing it or end users attempting to do it, or even your internal IT, if you've got an IT person, the ability to attempt to auto patch and auto remedy is critical. Application baselining is another topic that continues to come up that this platform can allow us to do. So we can basically say, your systems always have to have this AV, they always have to have this, because that's one of those things, if we go back to Meter, that a bad actor does, they try to disable those tools. They try to circumvent that. So if we can baseline those systems and say, we always want these, notify me of an anomaly, we can then get visibility, we can get insights into potentially something that's happening before an actual event has occurred, before boom has happened. And then the compliancy controls. I don't think we have a lot of people on that have asked about that, but we know that's where a lot of this is going. So for those that know NIST 800-171 or CIS controls, so many insurance and regulatory bodies are starting to line up to just say, yeah, instead of us putting out our own standard, we want you to abide by this framework. And we want you to show attestation and documentation that shows and proves that you're meeting those standards. Those are future items that we hope the platform can bring as we get farther into it. If you've got some questions specific about your network, your operation, obviously don't drop them here. Go ahead, shoot me a message, and we can find a separate time to connect on those. While we wait for Q&A, just to see if anything does come in there, I'm gonna just hop over to our summary here. Again, bad actors are becoming more sophisticated. That approach that your business takes to risk management needs to as well. Vulnerability scanning helps achieve visibility across all IT assets, not just the ones that are commonly maintained like servers and workstations. Although you're probably never going to have zero, knowing where there's risk and then taking steps to mitigate those along the way in both a defensive sense, but also avoiding larger issues later. At the end of the day, that's what we're attempting to do, is we want to prevent something that could have been minor from becoming something major. Otherwise, like always, Ontech, our goal is to always provide value and education. We hope that you found this informative and useful today. If you've got any feedback for us or anything you want to talk about, feel free. My door's always open. Otherwise, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.